Today, in Raising Innovators, we have a world-renowned expert on maker-centered learning. Welcome to the show, Dr. Edward Clapp.
Thank you so much, Marnie. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I am so excited about this. How did you become so interested about and passionate about research on maker-centered learning?
Well, this happened a long, long time ago, where a funder in California was really interested in the maker movement. And the maker movement was popping up all around them in the Bay Area. And they wanted to know, well, how can we incorporate the benefits of making into education? And my colleagues and I at the time, we said, well, we don't really know a whole lot about that. So let's explore that opportunity space. So that's where it all began, well over a decade ago.
And what are the benefits? So what did you unveil in your research?
There are several different benefits to maker-centered learning. And what we found was that when we talked to educators that did this sort of work, we said, well, what do you want your students to get out of these maker experiences you're bringing into your classroom? And of course, we heard a lot of STEM. But beyond just the STEM subjects, the learning in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, beyond that, they would say that when their students, when their young people in their classrooms see the next shiny thing in the world, they don't want them to say, oh, where can I get that? Or where can I buy that? They want their young people to say, I can do that. So they had this sense of this can-do spirit, like, I don't just have to be the consumer of things or the consumer of my experiences. I can be the creator of things, the creator of those experiences. So we interpreted this can-do spirit as having a sense of agency. So agency was really at the heart of what are the real benefits of maker-centered learning, and hence the project was called Agency by Design. But, and you might be interested in this, Marnie, if you want to have a fun time this weekend, you can do a literature review on agency from the perspective of psychology and phenomenology and philosophy and feminist studies, and you'll find that there are many people that write about agency and none of them agree with each other. So we found that we had to come up with our own definition of agency. So we viewed agency through the lens of making, and we came up with a definition or a concept that we call maker empowerment.
Okay, so what is maker empowerment and what is agency in based on what you just said?
Yeah, so maker empowerment we describe as having a sensitivity to the design dimensions of the world, along with the inclination and capacity to shape one's world by building, tinkering, redesigning, or hacking. So this is a very interesting definition. It's a very Project Zero-based definition, which is where all this research took place, because it doesn't describe a skill. Like critical thinking is a skill, but you can have critical thinking as a skill, but not know when to use that skill. So what maker empowerment describes is what we call a disposition. And from a dispositional perspective, these generative approaches to thinking have three different parts, and they're all within that definition I just shared. They have the capacity or the ability to do something. They have the inclination or the desire or motivation to do that thing. And then they have sensitivity, the alertness to occasion, knowing when to do that thing. So maker empowerment, has those various elements to it. Like you're empowered, you can act as a maker, you're motivated to make things, and also you're aware or sensitive to when there are opportunities to engage in making. So that's how we see agency through the lens of making.
Well, this is critical for the next generation to have all this capacity and skills. And when do you start introducing these principles in school settings?
We found that we can introduce these educational perspectives across the educational spectrum. So we've found that there's a lot of uptake for maker-centered learning in early childhood education, but also in K through 12 education, in higher education, in adult learning. So really we can introduce maker-centered learning in many different spaces throughout the curriculum. We also see maker-centered learning as being curriculum agnostic. So not specific to any one discipline or not, but being applicable across the different disciplines. And it's important that we note that different from concepts like maker education or even design thinking, this isn't different content. This is an approach to teaching and learning that helps educators reach their curricular goals in any discipline. So it's not new content. It's not something else educators need to teach. It's an approach. It's a set of strategies, a set of tools.
I love. And how would that look like in a classroom setting?
Well, it takes many different forms. I think it all depends on what the classroom is. Sometimes that what it looks like is there's lots of tools, there's lots of materials. Students are up and out of their seats. They're moving around. Sometimes they're working on devices of various different sorts. And sometimes they're engaging in education in ways that we might expect when we walk into a classroom, using more traditional tools like books, and they're sketching and drawing. What it doesn't look like is students sitting in rows, listening to an educator who is espousing knowledge from the front of the classroom, and they're just obediently taking in. So there's always an aspect of play and having fun and prototyping, and I would even say an aspect of mischief even within maker-centered learning.
And let's go back there to what you just mentioned of that traditional education setting where the learner was a recipient of that information. What are the consequences of us keeping like that type of teaching methodology in the next generation?
Yeah, so many people have heard the phrase, not for these students, not for this century, and that the traditional, kids in rows model of education is very much derivative of the Industrial Revolution. It kind of draws upon that approach that was popular back then and effective back then. But education in many settings, sadly, has not evolved to keep pace with the times. And we need to really understand what it is that our young people need today, and what the world they live in looks like, and how to meet them where they are, but also to challenge them so that they can be successful in life and work in the decades to come. So I would say we're missing an opportunity to really support our young people for our contemporary world and the world of the future if we adhere to those, a century years old model of education.
Absolutely. One thing I love is that Project Zero and their work, they created thinking routines to help educators with this type of strategies. Can you walk us through like that process and what is a thinking routine?
Sure. So there are many different definitions for what a thinking routine is. What I like to say is that they're short mnemonic devices. So they're kind of short phrases that you can remember quite easily. A popular one is See, Think, Wonder. Another popular one that's specific to maker-centered learning is Parts, Purposes, Complexities. So you kind of have these three different parts. So See, Think, Wonder. What do you see? What do you think about what you see? And what do you wonder about what you see? Parts, purposes, complexities. If you're looking at an object or a system, what are the different parts of that object or system? What are the purposes of those parts? And how do those parts come together in a way that is complex? So if you routinize these generative thinking behaviors, they then become habits or habits of mind. So routines lead to habits, and habits of mind, develop a way of seeing and being in the world. And we might call that a disposition as well. So thinking routines are meant to develop generative habits of mind, which develop disposition. So a way of seeing and being in the world.
Well, we've been practicing thinking routines across our schools, and we can really say that they have changed and transformed the way we're teaching and the teachers. And we also use it ourselves. It started with that. So we are very thankful for all the research and everything that you have contributed to the world of education. So tell us a little bit about one of the projects that you're working on right now that you're proud of.
Well, I think that that directs us to the work that we're doing here in Central Florida in Orange County, where we're working with a network of preschools facilitated by yourself and others, and really supporting early learning teachers and caregivers to engage their young people in maker-centered learning so that they develop that sense of agency from a young age. It's also important that young people become sensitive to design. That's another big outcome of this work, having a sensitivity to design. So too often we just passively move through the design dimensions of our world. And what maker-centered learning helps you do, especially a young person, is to become sensitive to the design dimensions of the world. So by becoming sensitive to the design dimensions of our world, both the objects and systems that we interact with, we can then see opportunities for change and see ourselves as change agents within that space. So we're really excited about the project here. it's working with that cohort of educators, but we also have an important parent component to the work, where every time we have the pleasure of coming down here to Central Florida, we not only work with the educators who are part of the cohort, we work with groups of parents who have children, parents and caregivers, that is, who have children within those early learning centers, so that we can help those parents and caregivers develop strategies to bring maker-centered learning into the home. So the real goal of this project is empowering communities to shape their worlds. And I think that's so exciting.
Absolutely. It has definitely transformed our county. In Orange County, we're very excited about this program. And one of the things that we've noticed in the schools are children, what you just mentioned, being aware of their surroundings and having that empowerment of looking at objects. Like we have kids looking at clocks and tinkering and open this, and now they feel more empowered and they demystify, oh, this is a clock or something that they couldn't touch. We're allowing them to explore the object, the different components. And besides that empowerment, what are other benefits that children experience from having this type of experiences in the classroom?
So I think another big benefit that we're seeing is developing a sense of empathy and perspective taking. So through maker-centered learning, if you're redesigning an object, if you're redesigning a system, you have to think of all of the people that interact with that object or system. So another popular thinking routine is parts, people, interactions. So when we're looking at a system, how do we consider the different parts of that system, the various people who engage with that system, and how those parts and those people interact with one another? So before we even get at the point where we're instituting or making change in any sort of way, we're taking the perspectives of others, we're developing a sense of empathy. And I feel like that's another really important outcome, is it supports young people to become systems thinkers, which I believe will be one of the most important approaches to life and work in the future. I would say it's a skill, but it's also a disposition to be a systems thinker. So I think that's another outcome, is being a systems thinker.
A big picture.
Big picture and seeing how all the different parts connect. But through being a systems thinker, developing that sense of empathy and perspective taking.
What were some of the projects that caught your attention, you and your colleagues here in Orange County from the schools?
So there were a few different ones, and we're actually very excited for an exhibition that we're holding with all the cohort of educators to learn more about what they've been up to. But two that catch my eye was there were some educators who are looking closely and exploring the complexity of bandages. So Band-Aids and what have you in their classroom, and young people were looking at them and really understanding how they work and how does a Band-Aid help heal you, and what is the importance that it's made in a certain way, and why are certain colors used and everything. So they were really exploring the complexity of Band-Aids, and I thought that was really fabulous. Another one was there were a group of educators that were working with students, and there were a couple of students that were having a hard time with lunch or the food that they were eating. They didn't really like what they had. So they looked closely and explored the complexity of various lunch foods. One of them was a hot dog, and they really understood how a hot dog was made and composed, and what were the various parts of it, and everything, and how is a hot dog complex. And just having that greater understanding of something like a hot dog was motivation enough to actually eat it.
Yeah, and the things that you're talking about are very simple day-to-day things that they explored. What is the role of technology in the maker-centered learning movement?
Well, I'm going to get to the piece about, very simple things first. So we have our approach to maker-centered learning is that it should be the tools and strategies that we develop should be applicable to environments that have low cost or no cost technologies. So you can do this work with very little. You don't need fancy tools or technologies or materials in order to engage in maker-centered learning. You can do this with recycled materials. You can do this with found objects, or in the examples I just gave, a package of bandages or a hot dog. Things that are just in the teaching and learning environments that aren't fancy tools that you have to use a lot of your resources to go out and acquire. That being said, Maker-centered learning, being disciplinary agnostic, is applicable across different technologies. So while we can employ maker-centered learning just using recycled cardboard, we can also employ maker-centered learning using any variety of technology or technical tools or software. It's really about the thinking that goes into what you're making, doing, or exploring, and much less about being centered on a particular type of technology or a particular type of tool that you must have in order to engage in this work. That's just not the case. You can engage in this work with any sorts of tools and technologies.
And I've seen how you worked magically with the teachers in this cohort. I see that when you first started, they were all probably intimidated by the concept because it sounded complicated or fancy. And I've seen the teachers transform into pretty much like educators that are empowered themselves. So how did you achieve that goal?
Well, that's the essence of it all, isn't it, Marnie? That we're hoping to empower communities to shape their world. So it's not just centering on the children. Of course, that's one of our primary objectives, is that young people are empowered to shape their worlds and become sensitive to design. But, of course, in order to do that, we have to bring the educators along. And they're probably the most important stakeholders in this whole venture, is to support educators in being sensitive to design, finding opportunities to affect change, and feeling maker empowered. So the way that the vehicles that we use to do that, we really set up what we call a professional learning community model. And that's very popular across many different domains, is to have communities of practice that come together, allow themselves to share their work, to be vulnerable, to be in communion with one another, as well as what we call collaborative inquiry. So we bring our skills and expertise as researchers into an environment where teachers bring their skills and expertise as teachers, as people who work with young people. And together we find ways to explore topics that are interesting to them, while also being interesting to our team. So I would say the combination of establishing a professional learning community grounded in trust, also paired with the collaborative inquiry model that brings researchers and practitioners together to co-explore and co-create together.
Any stories from this cohort of teachers that you've seen how they've grown in their maker capacities?
Oh, it's so hard to just pick one, Marnie. It just feels that every time that we've been here to visit in Central Florida, we see teachers, growing all the time, and they're always surprising us. And I know tomorrow when we have our big exhibition, we're going to be surprised again with the big steps, the giant steps that the teachers take in between our visits.
I love how you've not only first empowered the teachers, but then the approach of involving the parents and educating the parents, because we've seen that the collaboration between the school and the home has been so important for this work. Mm-hmm. The parents are now promoting this work with other parents, and it's become the design of this program has been so meticulously, carefully crafted that we've seen the advantage and the benefits as a community. Anything about the experience with the parents?
Yeah, well, so the focus on parents came from a previous research project that we engaged with educators, a couple of different schools in Hong Kong. So working all the way on the other side of the world, introducing maker-centered learning into what were fairly traditional teaching and learning environments. And our colleagues there wisely said that if we're going to change practice, we have to bring parents along. If it's different from what they experienced when they were young people, we have to introduce them to these new approaches to teaching and learning. So we were, really focused on parents through that work and developed this approach towards bringing parents along. And just with the drive for this project to empower full communities to shape their worlds, it only made sense to build on what we learned in Hong Kong and emphasize parent engagement in terms of making that bridge from what happens in school and also connecting it to what's possible at home.
Well, we're definitely very grateful to have had the sponsorship of the Early Learning Coalition of Orange County in growing together as educators and as a community and hosting this wonderful event. And we hope that this spreads to other counties in Florida and around the country, because we've seen the powerful, transformative experiences that this program has in our community, and it could have potentially everywhere in the country. So thank you so much for being here today. And if you like this podcast, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to that we're going to host other educators that have been participants in this community and hear from them firsthand the impact of this wonderful journey.